Welcome. We are going to be passing the mic from person to person, not because you can't hear us, but for our streamers this morning and also for the recording. So it's a little bit awkward for us, so we may forget or I may hold it here and hog it and not pass it along. But I think I've met everybody in the room, but one more refresher. I'm Debbie Schriver, and I have to tell you, I'm interested in cults because of these individuals who were in Tony Alamo Christian Ministries, and I'll tell you more about that group in a minute. But we are here today to talk a lot about identity. All of us grow and develop a self-identity, and much of it is by accident. It's by where we grew up, it's by others who influence our lives, it's by how we're wired, our own kind of psyche, and our brain development. And you all know during trauma times, our brain is affected by that, particularly children. And so we want to talk today. I think sometimes at our conferences, we do a lot to talk about what it was like in a cult. And we do a lot about talking about what's it like to get out. But we would like today to go a little bit deeper and look at how am I figuring out who I am? And how am I navigating through life right now as a confident person? And when am I not confident? And what can I do about that? Who am I? And how am I continuing to develop? My identity is changing daily, and I'm 72, almost 73 years old. So it really does, it's a lifelong process. And so I want to have each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And right now I'm going to ask you to tell us your name. And these two individuals to my right grew up in Tony Alamo Christian Ministries. And after brief introductions, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that environment. And then we'll go to some questions. And we want this to be, we have questions that we're going to guide our discussion through. But we also are going to invite you as we talk. If you have a question, put it on out there so that we can interact and be sure to cover your questions. And I may say, that's getting us way off course. Hold on to that until we get a little bit further. But most likely I won't. I really want this to be interactive, and we want to be sure to say what we need to say, but also address what your needs are. So, Shaina, I'm passing it to you. Can you tell us who you are and how old you were when you exited the cult? And how was it that you exited the cult? How was it that you got out of there?
Hello, everyone. My name is Shaina Broderick. I was at the age of 13 when I was rescued by the FBI from the cult, and I was immediately put into foster care. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Matthew Broderick. I was 15 when the FBI also took me out in a raid and was placed into a foster home as well and stayed there for, gosh, I don't even remember how long. Almost a year, I think, until we ended up moving around. But, yep. You want to pass it?
Hi, I'm Lorna Goldberg, and my identity as a professional is I'm a clinical social worker and a psychoanalyst. Bill and I have had a support group for many years, and the centerpiece of my work is really working with former cult members.
Let me tell you a little bit about Tony Alamo Christian Ministries. And I do want to say, Shaina, you have moved on because you said you were freed. And I think back then you were taken, and it probably didn't feel like being freed.
Of course. It was a very scary ordeal.
Yeah, very scary ordeal. And so let me tell you what some of the factors that made that very scary. How many of you have heard of Tony Alamo Christian Ministries? Good. It started in 1970. in California. Tony and Susan Alamo were two beings. I like to think of them as maybe two kind of evil beings that, when they crashed together, created something that was absolutely horrible. They were greedy. They were motivated by greed and power. They met in Hollywood, and they created a compound. They worked in a house for a while in Hollywood, and then they created a compound in Saugus, which is in the Canyon Country outside of Hollywood. And their shtick was, "Come find the Lord, be saved." And they used the Bible. It was the tell me do you remember the King James? Thank you. I just blanked on that. They used the King James version, and like very many unhealthy leaders, they twisted it to fit their own version of how they wanted people to work for them and live with them. And they targeted young people in Hollywood. If you all think about the late 60s and 70s, we had the flower children, didn't we? We had people that went to Hollywood, went to California, went west, went to San Francisco to find utopia, if you will. They were looking for peace, no war, a voice. Many were college age. And I have to tell you, my spirit was right there too. I didn't go to California, I stayed in college, but I was demonstrating. I was feeling the passion of the times. And I was at Woodstock, yes. I'm very proud of that, and I actually have a tattoo to show you if you want to see it. But Tony and Susan would approach young people who were struggling to make ends meet, who were out on the streets, basically, living in Hollywood, looking for that kind of place, looking for camaraderie, looking for people who thought the way they did, who wanted something better, wanted a happy life of peace and love. And so Susan, in particular, was very good and charismatic at reaching people. I will tell you that looking at her, hearing her tapes, reading all about her, I don't see the charisma, but she did have it. And so she was kind of the one that pulled people in. Tony was the one who was a power and promoted Susan. And they were quite a team. They did marry. And this will let you know kind of the temper of that. One time when Tony and Susan were driving down Hollywood Boulevard, Susan said, "Tony, what do you see when you look out here?" He said, "I see a bunch of useless, dirty hippies." Susan said, "Oh no, Tony, this is our harvest." And they brought them in. They said, "We'll give you food, free housing, and love." And what that was anything but. It was very controlled. Everything they did was controlled. The way they lived, what they did each day, their hours, everything was controlled. And these were the first gen. And the first gen that I have talked with tell me we were the first kids. And that's important for me to get. Because the first gen then had children, and second gen, we have grandparents, and basically then Shaina and Matthew and so many more were born there. And they expanded their reach and had compounds in Arkansas, had property in many different places, claimed to have followers in Africa, and Tony never spoke from the pulpit. He did recordings, and those were played. And by the time Shaina and Matthew came along, by the time they came along, Tony was definitely not out there preaching, but Susan had passed away. And just to give you a little snippet of Susan, when she was in her hospital room, she said to one of the followers who was close and with her, she was heard to have said this. This follower was in there. Tony was by her bed, and she said, "Tony, you're going to have to give up the church because you'll wreck it." And he really was concerned because it was her charisma that brought the followers money. They worked for free. They built mansions. They built houses. They lived in squalor many times in the early days. They were enslaved by Tony and Susan Alamo. And so he was afraid that he would lose all his followers and therefore his money and his power. So he dressed Susan in a wedding gown, laid her in a coffin, and put her in the dining room. She was embalmed, but put her in the dining room and had followers 24/7 pray around that casket for her resurrection. And that happened for 6 months. So you can see what's going on with that mind. And during that time, Tony was always a rapist, but at that time he became a rapist of younger girls. And we don't need to go there. I'm not going to go there, but I'm setting the scene. And in 2008, he was finally sentenced to life without parole and they got him through the Mann Act for taking underage girls across the state for illicit purposes. He continued to rule from prison. He continued to have a strong cult from prison. I interviewed him when he was in prison. His wives, he had a number of wives, set up a home at prison, and they would then, mete out his orders, and he enforced staying in the cult through shunning fears, through breaking up families, and saying, girls here, boys here, Dad, you go out on the road and do transportation services, drive the materials that are given to us as donations to help the poor were in warehouses. I don't know if you all did this, but I think you did, in warehouses. Repackaged them, used acetone to take the expiration dates off cans, repackaged them, and then Tony would ship them out and about to resell. And so during that time, they continued that, and he enforced his rules through shunning, as I said, through starvation, through sentences of all kind, through putting girls in the house of scorn, which was where girls would live for a while and get the message that they are horrible, that they are pigs, they are weasels, I'm using his words. You get the picture. And he was frightening and controlling. So that sets the stage. If you want to know more about that, I hate to promote something, but I'm going to promote this. My book, Whispering in the Daylight, is the book that belongs to these people, these young people. It's the story of the children, and they turned my life right side up. They introduced me to what life can be on the dark side, and I've never gone back. And so that book, it'll be on display. And also there's a book called Mama Said that Christiane Coe, who is Susan Alamo's birth daughter from Arkansas, my husband helped her write that book. It's fairly new, and it's a page turner. It's heartbreaking, and it's also kind of funny. And you can't make up the stuff that's in her book. Anyway, so I'm going to stop there. This is a good place to stop, but you can see those books and get some more information, and they're available on Amazon and in bookstores. Yes. Well, I don't want to get too off course. It's not about me, but let me just tell you, in the book, I have his conversation, our interviews in the back. I interviewed him 3 times. He would not let me see him in person, so we did it online. We Zoomed. And I had really prepared interview him. I really wanted to see that man in person and sit there and talk to him. As it turned out, I don't think I could have withstood it. I don't think I could have been in the room with him. So I was really grateful that it came to be the way it did. But the most awful thing he said to me was, "You're just a self-appointed scribe writing a big, stupid book." And I thought, you can't get better than that. Come on. So anyway, and I don't want to lighten the fierce power and danger that he had over particularly young people. So what I'd like to do is sort of get started. And this is about Shaina and Matthew. And Shaina has come to at least 2 other conferences and spoken. And it's really difficult to do this. And Matthew hasn't come to conferences yet. And I want to let you know, Matthew is a lawyer. And both of these individuals have done a lot to move forth and create lives. And so I guess I'm going to start with some questions. And one of them is, when you were living in Tony Alamo's group, how did you see yourself? How did you see yourself? What was your identity? And consider how your self-identity may have changed as you were growing up in that environment.
Well, I didn't really have any self-identity. We were all one in the same. We were all kind of treated almost the same. We followed all the rules daily. I never even thought about a future. I mean, it was just, our minds were pretty much controlled. I mean, we followed all the rules day by day. Yeah.
I'll say, yeah, I guess we didn't really have much of our own self-identity. I mean, yeah, I was a faithful servant. That's what it was. We were all part of the body of Christ, and the world was going to end any day. God was going to raise Susie from the dead. We're all going to go to the end times. And so I was just in that mindset. Never knew the world was always coming to an end. So it's like you're just a servant. You're just there to do your part and do whatever he says. And then I would say it kind of didn't give you much time, because then towards the end, he started requiring you to go to church every day, twice on Sunday, and then also listen to his messages every day. So you're just constantly hearing his voice, not yours.
Thank you. So you all addressed the goals a little bit. Was your goal to survive? Would you say? Did you have any other goals at that time?
No, I mean, there was no goals. I would say it was, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but it was surviving. Looking back at it, it just makes me, it's like I was so naive to so many things that happened around me. I was so blind because this is all I ever knew. I didn't really have my own thoughts. I mean, because we were told, any of our thoughts that were outside of, the doom and gloom or whatever he had preached and whatever, he interpreted the Bible as, any thoughts outside of that was we were going to get sent straight to hell. So I felt like my thoughts, like he would know my thoughts, And so I was just, we were all just like puppets. But I mean, obviously I didn't feel like that. I felt like we were, on our path to get the stars in our crown when we get to heaven. I mean, everything was just doom and gloom. Like Matthew had said, the world was ending. And our job was to do what we can to make sure we go to heaven.
I mean, that pretty much summed it up. But yeah, I mean, like I said, he didn't give you much time, and the thoughts thing was a real thing. He would say, I mean, looking back, it does seem really dumb, but when that's all you know, you don't realize that. And it's like any contrary thoughts, him, are blasphemous, go straight to hell. So you learn to push those out and forget them. So you don't realize it until after the, well, I'll get into that, I guess, later probably, after the fact when you finally realize you were brainwashed as a kid. But yeah.
Thank you. I want to clarify, these are brother and sister, and there was a larger sibling group here. And I think it's interesting to note the similarities, and also there'll be differences. And I also want to say, this is Shaina and Matthew's experiences, and we're not here to say we're speaking for all survivors of cults, and we're not speaking of all born and raised people. It's their experiences, but I think we can learn a lot that then we think about where we have been, we think about others, and there are some common threads. And certainly what you've described in terms of how your thoughts are controlled is very much a common thread. I also want to emphasize again, they did not see the outside world. They were not exposed to anything outside their living space. And once when you might know a rule, it would change for no reason. And the penalties were extremely physical, extremely emotional, intellectual, on every level. They went very deep. When you exited on that 2008, and that was a scary time, the FBI came in and they had been shown films of Waco and learned about Waco. And Tony had said, the FBI is going to come in here and kill us all someday. And unfortunately, news of that particular raid that day was leaked to the media by mistake from law enforcement. And so they had to move very quickly. So Tony was somewhat prepared. So on that particular day in 2008, they didn't get everyone, but then they kept getting everyone, and they kept pulling out people. And it's important for you to know this cult exists still today, right now. But imagine then if you were born to this world in 2008 and all the things that happened. Some, others of your peers have told me they really hadn't seen a Disney movie before. And they also weren't allowed to interact, male and female. So all of a sudden, when they were dropped in public school, that's pretty difficult. And they also didn't really have a sense of core family. And I know you all love your family, and you had that. But at the same time, their living situations were so different. The rules were so pervasive. So to be dropped into a foster family, where really the foster family didn't know where they came, what it meant to leave where they came from. And so it had to be really, really difficult, really difficult. So when you first exited the group, when you first left that September in 2008, what were your feelings about your identity as you were taken? What were your feelings?
Well, when we were first taken, I mean, the FBI came and with guns and everything. I guess they didn't know what to expect. They didn't know if Tony had. So I was living in Tony Alamo's house with his 11 plus, I don't know how many wives he had at the time. And when we were taken, it was absolutely scary. I remember when we got put into the vehicles with, I think it was like 4 or 5 other girls at the time. We were all just crying and telling each other to pray. And I just remember like trying to watch all the signs as we were driving by, and so I can be like, oh, I can remember where we're at, so I can escape and go back. I mean, this was just something I never thought would have happened, in my lifetime. And we were taken to, I think, a Red Cross facility with like cots and everything. And we stayed there for about 2 or 3 days. And then they slowly started separating us. And I was taken to like a different town, to a new foster home. And I was there for about a month. They didn't put me in school at the time because they were trying to figure out what to do with me. So every day I would go sit with a DHS worker that was assigned to me. I would sit there and watch. I had a little DVD player, and I would watch movies and be entertained that way. But and then I was put into public school after a month of that, and I was very obviously like socially. I mean, it was so different to be around boys, my age. And we were always taught by Tony Alamo that like public schools and everything was like so sinful, they're walking around having sex and like, just all these like awful things. So that's what I was prepared for. And I remember like bringing my Bible to a school with me, and like anytime a boy or anybody would walk up to me, I would just be like quoting Bible scriptures and stuff. But it was scary. I mean, I felt like I had to hold on to my identity because that's all I had. I was by myself. I was 13 years old. I didn't have anyone to talk to. I was in this unknown, scary, terrible place. So all I had was my identity, and my identity was Tony Alamo. And so that was just instilled, and I would have his his voice in my head, and that's what I held on to for my identity when I was first taken.
I actually was on watch duty at one of the properties when the raid happened with her. So I saw the cars. All I saw was the line of police cars, SWAT vehicles, block every entrance, block everything. And then they went to where she was living. And I knew what was happening at that point. And then subsequently later, they came. I think I was at one of the court hearings when the U.S. Marshals came in and they took me out. And then took me to a van with a bunch of other kids that they had rounded up. And we went to a.
So you were taken 2 months later after we were taken. They
Yeah.
came back because he was still a part of it. And then, yeah, they came back 2 months later.
Yeah, so 2 months later, I was a little worried because her story, she'd bounced around homes for a while, and so did some of my other sisters. So I didn't know what to expect. They took us to a gym the first time with a bunch of cots and stuff and did like physicals and everything. And then my first foster home, I was fortunate enough to be placed with someone that also took in some of the brothers, because where she ended up was living with some of the girls that were taken. And so I was fortunate enough to get some of the brothers of them, so we kind of got to stay together. They were
When you say brothers, do you mean other boys that were taken?
boys that were taken. Yeah, so there was like, she was with some of the sisters, and I was with some of the brothers of those sisters, to clarify. And we, it was tough because I just thought I was going back eventually. Like, this was all going to be cleared up. It was a mistake. This was the devil just trying to ruin it, a good thing. And it took me a while to get his voice out of my head. I would say probably about 8 months to a year. And I ended up moving with my aunt in Virginia, and that's when I finally realized. Took me, I was, like I said earlier, you just learn to push the bad memories out. So you don't remember them. And I just decided one day, I was like, I'm going to go read all these lies that these girls are saying in the court stuff and everything, their testimonies. And I started reading them, and I started remembering that I was there for some of those things. I was in the room. They weren't lying. And I started revisiting, going back my memory and realizing that there was just stuff I'd forgotten. And then when I'd bring it up, they'd be like, oh, that never happened, or this, always an excuse. And I was like, wait, well, now you're lying. But, and that goes against your cardinal rule if you claim to be a very religious person. And, but yeah, it took me a long time to finally just realize that it was a lie. And I had to take a point where I was always a kid. I read a lot, the Bible a lot. I had to take a step back. I couldn't read it anymore. Like, all I heard was his voice, and I was like, I need to detox and just start new. And it's pretty much just flip the switch and say, like, I'm going to see what life's like on the other side of the fence. Yeah, that took about a year for me.
You use the word detox. So You use the word detox. So what does that exactly mean?
I meant just, like, just get his voice out of my head. Stop completely. Like, I stopped listening to Christian music. I stopped reading. I stopped praying. Like, so, like, for me, it was just not hearing, like, when I'd read something, I would hear his, like, his twisted version of it. And I was to the,
Such as, because I'm interested in hearing about what the voice said to each of you.
I mean, I guess just when you hear the messages all the time and him reading the Bible and interpreting it, so when you're reading the scripture, you hear what he expounded on in your head, what he interpreted as, and then the messages that followed, because the message tapes weren't always about the Bible. Sometimes they were, if someone made him mad and did something wrong, he would blast you in front of everybody and talked about it on the tape and drag out your sins and how you're a terrible person and yada, 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 and you need to repent. And so, like, when you would read that, or the King James Version specifically, you would just hear the messages and the things, and it would bring it back up. And for me, I was just like, I just realized this is all his version of things are a lie. I'm just gonna forget about it and move on and just be a regular kid.
I mean, yeah, essentially that's what it was. I mean, the voice, his voice in my head was how he interpreted the Bible. And I mean, like, it was so scary. It was so scary. I mean, I remember we went to sleep listening to his tapes. I would have nightmares of like hell and demons and like all these things all the time, and just constantly thinking like you're going to hell just for having these little tiny thoughts that are just normal, thoughts. A specific thought. Okay. Thinking a boy is cute, I don't know. Um, I mean, yeah, because we literally had never talked to another male, except our family, like my siblings or my dad. We weren't allowed to. So just thinking, you know, that another boy was cute was sinful. But yeah, no, hearing his voice in my head was everything that I would do, talking, going to public school, when I first came out, and having these like kind of conversations just about boys or about this or that. It was just like you always felt guilty. You felt like you were sinning. If you didn't wake up and pray, if you weren't praying all the time, I felt guilty. Just anything to do with religion, but religion was our life. So you just felt guilty all the time. You felt like you were sinning a lot. And that took me, I would say, about 3 months. It took me about 3 months to kind of get out of that mindset and realize, wow, like what we were living in was absolutely not normal. And then I just was, I wanted to start fitting in. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I have to say, 3 months to a year doesn't sound very long to me. You're 13.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Matthew, how old were you?
15.
15. So, 15 years. I'm kind of wondering what helped you.
Well, it wasn't like 3 months and I'm just completely, that's out of our head. I mean, even to this day, we still deal with that. There's still, I mean, there's still those thought processes that kind of take you back to the cult mindset. But when I say in 3 months, I realized what the life that we were living was not normal. And what helped me was I after 3 months, I moved into a foster home. Her name was Tanya Griffin, and she also had three of the other girls that were taken with me. And she was just so loving and nurturing, and seeing those girls trust her. The three girls that were with me were older. They were like 2 to 3 to 4 years older than me. And being feeling safe again because I was around people that I knew, and then seeing them trust her, I think kind of helped me to sort of trust her, even though I have major trust issues to this day from all of the things, even coming out of the cult and jumping from foster homes and going to live with family members and going back to foster home. Like, I have a lot of trust issues, but she's still in my life to this day, Tanya Griffin, and she's just an amazing woman. She's in all of our lives. Um, yeah. Yeah.
And I would say, just to expand, well, it took, like I said, it took me about 8 months to realize that it was wrong. Now, it took a lot longer to finally get it all out. But yes, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. But just to expound on when you're saying, like, what thought process would you have to say? He raised us in fear of God. So we were raised yes, there's New Testament, but he would always, when it came to the love of God, it was the love of God is keeping his commandments. I'm not going to get into the whole religious aspect of it, but I mean, it was fear. So once you finally decided to let go a little of some of that fearing all your life, it was different. I mean, because it was coming out in the foster home, they monitored every phone call we had with any of our family, even ones that were in and out, had to be third-partied. So there was always someone listening, which was annoying. And then, like, when they first took me to a psychologist, bless her heart, she was like, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I've never heard anything like this before. I have no idea what it's like to do it." And I was just like, "And you can't help me." And so I was like, so I just kind of shut off from that. Yeah. But yeah, it was definitely, like you said, acclimating to school was hard. I still remember the first time I went to a classroom, well, in my English class. We go to the computer labs. Granted, we never use computers. And they're like, "All right, everybody, get on your things, get on Google. We're going to search some things and look for things." And I was like, so I'm like sitting there, and like everybody's doing their thing, and I'm like, "So what's Google?" And everybody in the room just like stands and turns, and I'm like, "Just kidding." And they're like, "Oh, you're funny." And then I turned to, then I turned to the girl next to me, like, "Seriously, what's Google?" And she just stared at me for a second, and then her eyes, I saw she realized, and she goes, "Here you go," and did it for me. But it was definitely an adjustment period, I would say. It took a while. Yes, you.
I wanted to ask you about, first of all, that you're so very courageous to tell your story. Storytelling is so important, and I applaud you for that. But I wanted to ask
Thank
you
you.
about your aspirational identities, and particularly if they're gendered in the ways that, so Shaina, when you were young, what was it that you aspired to be
Coming out of the cult
before you left?
before I left. Okay. Um, I mean, I was such a faithful follower. I really didn't aspire to be anything. I aspired to go to heaven. Like, I literally wanted to do every rule. I was one of like the rule followers. And it's funny, like, I wish I had some of my other siblings here and stuff, because one of my older sister, Marissa, she was very, what you would say, rebellious, but in real life, she's just a normal teenage girl that was curious, but she broke the rules all the time. She had her own mind. She was very strong-willed, and she would do things all the time and get beat for it and get in trouble and like separated from us for doing just normal things. But I was always the rule follower. I had to obey and, keep the commandments and follow the rules so I can get to heaven. Um, but I didn't aspire to be anything. I mean, I know, like, really what was expected of all of us was to get married. I mean, I know lots of girls that I grew up with that were married at the age of 12, 11 to like 20, 30-year-olds and was popping out kids at the age of 13, 14. Um, I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to be a mom all my life. So that was probably, if anything, it was to be a mom, like to get married and all of that. Um, I did, but I didn't have really any aspirations of what I wanted to do when I was older. I just was like, I never thought of that.
I'd say it's probably about the same. I pretty much, let's see, how old? Moved out of my house and was working. Like started working when I was, I think, 10 or 11 years old, maybe 12. And was moving, going on trucks around the country, working in warehouses, landscaping, roofing, whatever was required, did it. Um, and I just was a good soldier. I got in trouble towards the end for something quite silly. I guess I'll just go ahead and share it. My big thing that I got in trouble and sent to the enforcer's house, the guy who did a lot of the beatings. I rode with my teacher from one end of the property to the other, and her son is like 2 days older than me. Granted, we don't know any sexual stuff, so there is no feelings or that, but someone decided to write a report and made it sound super nefarious that we were like doing things. And I'm like, I don't even know what sex is. Like, but yeah, that was like the biggest thing. And so like after that, I kind of was like, nope, follow the straight and narrow. Let's keep it going. So it wasn't aspire to be anything. It's just be a good worker and move on up.
So you indicated that you had a rebellious sister. What was your attitude towards her and that she was doing that? Because you were good soldiers.
Oh yeah, no, he would tell me from time to time that all my families are a bunch of reprobates and can't be are good for nothing, and then that he groomed people that way. Sometimes he'd be like, "You're doing good. You're a good. You're like you're doing good in your family." Like never the rest of them, he would harbor on her all the time. But I still loved her. She's my sister. I would wish she did differently, but because we were able to communicate at times, rarely, but it happened.
I guess it was Debbie had said he liked to isolate families, and that's exactly what he did to our family. So when my sister would be acting out and do these things, I mean, it was shameful. I was ashamed of her for doing these acts because, I was told they were wrong, so they were wrong. But she would get in trouble a lot, and she would get taken out of our house to go live with what he had referred to as the enforcer. His name was John Goldberg. He was the guy that beat all the children with all different kinds of boards you can think of. And so my sister would get taken out to go live with him. And sad thing is he lived right next door to us. So growing up, we would hear all the screams and all that from the children he would beat. And of course, that would include my sister and often my brother. I don't think my other brother, Nick, he got in trouble a lot as well. But anyways, yeah, my sister, she would get taken to go live with certain people. And so we wouldn't be around her, a lot or get to speak with her, even though she lived right next door to me. So yeah, she was isolated from us. And my feelings towards her were shameful. I loved her, but I was embarrassed of her, and I was embarrassed of any of like my family members that Tony was upset at, because that's how, I mean, he would do that. He would be like, you're doing good, but your father's a piece of crap, and then I would be embarrassed of my dad, and embarrassed of my mom, at some points when my mom would get in trouble for something. But yeah.
This is really hard. Isn't it hard to think about the people, the adults adults are supposed to love and be role models. and they were role models in a very different way. And your parents were controlled by Tony, and so there was no safe haven there. So when you came out, let's look at that again and look at the period of time when you were just getting used to the world out here. And you started noticing that maybe people had more normal lives or yours wasn't normal. And how did you make friends beyond the, I hope maybe you kind of felt kindly toward the young girl sitting next to you who said, here's Google. But yeah, she was nice. And how is it that did you open? And as you did, how did you feel about yourself? Because I would think you'd have a self that was the cult self, if you will, and then something else evolving or feeling conflicted a bit. What were you feeling during that time, and what's the metamorphosis that was going on there?
Once I started to fully come out of that mindset, it was hard for me. I was trying to fit in, but it was also very hard because obviously going to a new school, kids are going to ask like all different kinds of questions, like where are you from? What does your mom do? What does your dad do? And it was so complicated, and I was also embarrassed, like that I was in foster care because I was trying to fit in. So I would kind of like, I would lie and say, I would call Tanya my mom, my foster parents, I would call my mom and dad, and I would just avoid questions like the plague. Because it was, and then while, the first 2 years of me going to school, we were getting taken out every week to go to court cases, to the trial for Tony, to court for my dad, to try to get custody of us, going to therapy sessions. It was just a lot. So it was very hard for me to acclimate to into school and to fit in, and it took me a while, and it was hard for me to like keep friends or to trust people, and I ended up being like very private with my life. I didn't open up to hardly anyone. I think like the first time I ever told any of like my friends that had been my friends for even like 2 or 3 years, I opened up probably like my senior year of high school, and I told my friends about my past. I still have a hard time trusting people. I didn't know how people were going to take it. I also didn't want people to feel sorry for me or, victimize me or anything like that. And I didn't want to victimize myself. So, I was just always a listener. I listened to everybody else's story. I take things in, but I was very quiet. I was very shy. Oh my gosh. Like if anybody would talk to me, my face would turn red. Like, so it was hard for me to make friends. It was hard, my identity, because I didn't know who I was. I was kind of lying here and there about when people would ask me too many questions just because it was so complicated and I was trying to fit in. So it took me a while to really find my identity, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I would say it took a while. High school, like you said, was different. I mean, and foster parents I had, Candace and Robert, they were very, very nice, very sweet, but they were very young. And they just took in 4 adults with problems. Or not adults, but older kids with problems. And wasn't like I wasn't allowed to invite people over. I just didn't want to. People are like, what are you doing? Oh, you're going home? Oh, you live right there? Well, I can just come to your house. And I'm like, nah, let's do something else. But high school was just, I met some friends and, decided to try some new things. And, well, I guess I would have been Virginia when I decided that like I had my first sip of alcohol and I had my first cigarette. Don't worry about that part. think I was about 16, or maybe 17 when I first tried, but
And what allowed you to try it?
I just was, it was once I decided I wasn't going to be controlled by fear and that anymore. I decided I'm gonna, like, people say you can't just flip a switch. Sometimes for me, it kind of was. I just was like, you know what? Screw this noise. I'm done. I'm gonna try it. And I was like, let me try it. Let me take a hit. I'm like, this is why people smoke cigarettes. It was a while, and college is where I finally got, what's the word I'm thinking of? Came out of my shell, so to speak. Got involved in organizations, got very involved on campus, had friends, and I was about midway through college, because I would, for certain things, certain projects, it would be tough. Like I would have things that would come up with either my sisters or my family or something, and I would just get behind on a project or whatever, and so I would go talk to like some of my professors who I felt like I would just say, hey, look, this is what I'm dealing with. I apologize. I'm trying. It's just I'm having a rough time. And they'd be like, no, you're fine. Thank you for telling me. Don't worry about it. I'll give you an extension. I'll do this. But it wasn't until I got close with the vice provost of student affairs. And one day I was just having a bad day, and I just felt the need to tell her my story, where I was from. And in Arkansas, everybody knows what Tony Alamo is. So she was like, oh my God, sweetie. She was like, I had no idea, just from the life you've lived, the things you're involved in, how you treat yourself. I would have never guessed. And because I always just kept that life. Some people knew, but I didn't talk about it much and in great detail. But she was like, I challenge you to try and, because I did a lot of speeches and spoke to incoming students and everything. And I was a mentor as well for other students. And she was like, just think about this. Your story could help so many. She's like, I know of several kids right now that are going through a thing that don't think what you're living, the life you're living, is even possible for them. She was like, your story could help change their lives. Like, I just want you to think about it. I'm not pressuring you. She's like, just think about that. It's not about you. And I was like, I'm not going to use it as a crutch, because what I'm accomplishing, I'm doing it myself. You know, because they say whenever you get out, you're never going to amount to anything. And I was just like, nope, I'm going to college. I'm going to finish this. I'm going to get my degree. And at the time, I wanted to, what was it? Be an FBI agent, I think it was. Yeah. And sure. I think at that point was like the nexus of me deciding that I was going to start opening up more. And for me, yes, I had two identities, but later after that, well, there was another year or two after that, because my mom passed away like my sophomore year, and that I went in a funk again for a while. But after that, towards my senior year, I learned to be more open about it, and my identities meshed. So like now I can talk about it all day. You just got to know you just got to know the questions to ask. It doesn't bother me. I mean, yeah, there are days where things are low, not going to lie, but yeah. Oh, I will say I'm seeing it. I have a therapist now that I see when I feel like the need to. I don't distrust psychologists completely. No, it was just that one moment. Well, I shouldn't have said it like that, but yeah. Okay. Yes. Well, I'm not an attorney yet. I have to pass the bar exam for that. I'm very fortunate to work in the firm I work for, and they know my story. They were actually like, "Can we come with you?" But no, it's just I've worked in different. Trying to think of the phrases. I like where I am now. If I pass the bar, I know what I want to do. I do mostly like criminal defense and family law, and then some civil like help. I'm paralegal at the moment. But I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. So
You go ahead. Well,
your criminal.
yeah.
That's what you're.
That's what I'm interested in, helping people. And yet, like I've learned, because I worked at a big firm before, and worked at a few other places, and I just didn't like it. To me, it's just not. To me, just making money is not enough. It, yeah, like I want to be able to love what I do and believe in what I do. Go ahead.
So I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology. Me and you have had a talk about that because I was interested in actually getting my master's degree, and then I wanted to be a child psychologist, but those dreams are dead for me. So currently, right now, I actually work at a law firm as a legal assistant. It's it's not a place where I thought I was going to be. I was never really interested in law, but I love it. I love where I'm at now. I'm still unsure of what I want to do if I do want to go back to school. But out of like our family, Matt was the first one to graduate college and law school. And then I went on to graduate college. And so we were the only two out of all of our siblings that did that. I think it was always very important to us to like, in what we thought was be successful. So very proud of us.
So,
Oh, sorry.
what do you think makes you different than your siblings in your recovery from this traumatic experience of your past?
You want to take this one?
I think me and Matt are just more sure of ourselves. It's like I don't want to really speak for them, but maybe we just had like a stronger. It's like I don't really have like a big sense of identity, but like in a sense, I guess more of we have a more sense of identity. We were just kind of like goal oriented. So my three other siblings struggle a lot with the past, unfortunately. Mentally, a lot of that. And I think that me and Matt have somehow found a way to either block it out or disassociate it. To me, it honestly feels like a past life. Like I don't ever think of that life that I lived. Like it just seems it's always been so important to me to look forward, never behind. So I've blocked out like everything. I mean, not everything, but like a lot of my past. I don't remember a lot. Like even my little sister will tell stories sometimes, and I'm like, that I was there for and things that happened, and I'm shocked that she remembers that, and I absolutely do not. I've just blocked out a lot, and I think that was a way of me coping to be able to move forward and do the things where I'm at, whereas they're still struggling, with a lot of things. Like I said, I don't want to really speak for them, but I think we've just learned how to disassociate our past. And so those emotions don't overcome us a lot.
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily just like for me, I've just come to terms with it. I'm okay with it. It is the past. I'd be lying if I didn't say I had good friends and good support structure on the way. But I stayed focused. And when I did it, like, it was about my senior year of college when I realized you can't go to the FBI with a criminal justice degree, no matter what they say. And I had some friends that were going to law school, and I didn't even think it was possible. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. I was like, and he's like, well, why don't you take the LSAT and try that? And so I was like, you know what? All right, fine. I studied for 2 weeks during finals, took the LSAT, passed it. And then I was like, well, and then I did my applications, and I got accepted, and I ended up going to DC for an internship. Well, I'm going off topic here. But I don't know. I came to terms with it, and I talk about it more, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. Like, it's not something that's taboo for me. Like, people, you generally find it, I think it's kind of funny sometimes when people feel uncomfortable about it. But like, whenever someone said that, I'm like, you just have to be specific about questions you want to ask, because I can talk all day, and sometimes I go down a rabbit hole when I'm trying to focus on something. But yeah, I think we just had more, I think, self-identity.
More grit and determination, maybe. But you're blocking the past. You come to terms with it. But are there moments, Shaina, when it comes to you, when you're involved in something in the present, and it will trigger feelings from the past? And then in those moments, is there a way that you handle that?
No. I really had no emotions about it. Like I could talk about it to people, but I didn't tell a lot of people about my past because I'm just such a private person, and I'm working on that of just trusting more and opening up more. And it's still a work in progress. But I don't really have any emotions towards it. So like I never really had all these triggers, whereas I always dealt with my two sisters having so many triggers. And I never got that. Like I just never, it never affected me in that way. But as of lately, a few months ago, I started dealing with panic attacks and anxiety, which I had never dealt with before in my life. And it was absolutely the scariest thing I've ever dealt with. I felt like I was mentally insane. Didn't think I was ever going to like snap out of it. And now I'm on medication. I'm seeing a psychiatrist. I'm seeing a therapist. And yeah, I'm learning that maybe I never like to talk about my past. I mean, I can open up about it and it's not emotional for me, but maybe I never fully dealt with it. So I think that now there might be triggers. Like, I don't know, like just because I have this newfound anxiety and stuff I'm dealing with.
But I just like
Oh, sorry.
to make the point that you might be dealing with it now because you're stronger. You're more able to deal with it now. So blocking it was your way of coping initially, but perhaps now you've accomplished a lot, you have more confidence in yourself, and your body's saying, okay, Shayna's ready to handle this now.
Yeah, I will say I do still have moments, though. I'm not perfect. I still have things that happen, but yeah.
Just say that along the lines of what you're saying, Paul, and some people are more pragmatic. Even though people born and raised in groups are similar to some degree of having had the same traumatic histories, horrible histories, they come into the world with different temperaments. Even with Matthew and Shaina, their style, their personality style is unique to them. And as they move forward in their lives, they're able to claim their own individual personalities, their own individual identities. When they were in the group, there was a forced identity that they all had to survive. It was a survival technique to please the leader, do exactly what the leader said. And also, they had his voice in their head instead of their own voice, telling them what to do every moment and keeping them busy with that. So now that they're out, they're claiming themselves and their own personality styles. And that's a beautiful thing to see.
Yes.
So I want to, I'm sorry. Let me draw an analogy here that is very dear to my heart. My parents were Holocaust survivors. Okay, thank you. Usually
So
loud enough.
people
But
get that.
It's for the
Oh, for the tape, yes, of course. Let me draw an analogy. My parents they're both deceased. My parents were Holocaust survivors. I'm a second generation as a result. So when we look at the history of mass trauma, and of course the Holocaust was a mass trauma, your situation for you was also similar to a mass trauma, okay? Wasn't millions of people, but it was more than just you. It was your whole world as a child. What we know from our studies of Holocaust survivors is that when they were liberated in 1945, essentially for the next 40 years, almost 35 to 40 years, you heard very little about the Holocaust, okay? I mean, you heard it, but it wasn't as pervasive. It wasn't until the 80s, the 1980s, with Shoah and Schindler's List and a number of lots and lots of other things that were going on, that Holocaust studies really, people who had been through the Holocaust and second generation, like my sister and myself, that's when this really began to get moving in us, and we began to incorporate that history into our own personal histories. My point being that I want to agree very strongly with what Lorna said earlier, that for a lot of trauma survivors, what they need to do first is to put the past aside and function and focus on the present and develop their strength and their abilities in the present and in the immediate future. So of course with the Jews who survived the Holocaust, what did they do? They built a country. Okay, they came to the Middle East, they came to Israel, what is now Israel, and they built a country. Without getting into the issues related to that currently, I just want, I do want to say that you have to admire any people who can do that, who can, come from such mass trauma and then go on and not only just survive, but thrive. And I believe strongly that that for many people, not everyone, but for many people who survive these kinds of mass traumas, their first duty, so to speak, is to thrive. Once that happens, then you can revisit the past and not fall apart totally from revisiting. So I strongly, and the people that I work with who have come out of cults, a lot of times they're like, well, I don't really want to talk about that. I want to talk about what I'm doing now. And unlike what a lot of other therapists are trained to do, which is, no, we got to focus on your childhood, we got to focus on your past, I believe very strongly, absolutely, you focus on the present and the future.
I have a question, just kind of going back. I'm curious to know when you were a kid in the cult. I know, Matt, you talked about how you worked as a child. Did you have any kind of schooling, any kind of education? What was that like?
Thank you.
If you can kind of like go off of what I say. But so yeah, we did have schooling. We were all homeschooled. It was obviously not by a professionally trained teacher. It was a parent or and we were, I believe the curriculum we used was a Becca books, a Christian-based ordeal. But school was not important or enforced like we were when things needed to be done, working in warehouses. I mean, we started doing that. I was like 5, 6 years old. My grandfather ran a lot of the warehouses that Tony would have stuff shipped to and shipped from. And so we worked in warehouses a lot amongst many other things. So we were taken out when, a big project needed to be done. We would go do that instead, or go on what we would call tracking crews, where we would go and pass out Tony Alamo's literature, throughout the states. I think my first one was, I was 9 years old, and I went on a week tracking crew to, I think, Arizona. But yeah.
Yeah, we did the Becca book system. It was still all separate, boys and girls. Then we had to work afterwards, and then we'd work all summer. So sometimes we'd have school, But I mean, afterwards, you're going out and you're either landscaping, you're working in the kitchen, you're doing watch duty. And then sometimes we had the boys, we did watch duty on the properties where we'd have to stay up from like sometimes it could be 4 to 6 or whatever. And if you're late, you get put on a fast, which means you don't get to eat. And you also had to go everywhere in twos. So it's not like you could just go somewhere by yourself. You had to figure out a buddy system. Yeah, like what she said, when something needed to be done, we need to be done. I think I had been to 46 out of the 50 states by the time I was 15. Whether it be trucking, tracking, 'cause we go on month-long cruise sometimes, or working, doing projects somewhere, like, which still, I thought that was at least the one cool takeaway, but.
I was brought up in the exclusive brethren, so I know we didn't have beatings or anything like that, but I do understand your past. And here I am, and I'm getting emotional, and I don't know why. I left in 1960 when I was 15, when my parents chose to leave. It took me 30 years to realize that the brethren were wrong. And I think the reasons for that was because back in 1960, this organization didn't exist. There were no therapists, there was no internet, there was nothing. And I actually think I'm going to disagree with you, Steve, because I didn't thrive until I faced my past, until I dealt with the trauma, until I went through weeks and weeks of dealing with those traumas. Traumas, like you, I couldn't remember them. I still can't remember them. So I have emotional flashbacks sometimes, and I guess I'm having a bit of a one at the moment. In that I can feel the emotions, but I can't see what happened. I can't remember what happened. I can't talk about what happened. And it used to feel, it doesn't so much, I haven't had a real flashback for many years now, but it used to feel like I was falling into this darkness and I didn't know what was in the darkness. And I even sometimes thought, I need to go there to find what's in that dark, but I never managed to do so. But the therapy I did finally find was so brilliant, because I got to tell my story. Fragmented though it was, I got to tell it and I started putting it together. And I strongly recommend that you take that step before you do what I did and wait 30 years, because, you know, since I'd done that, I've thrived hugely. And unlike you, I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I went through a whole number of different professions. And the reason why I'm still going now, nearly 80, is because I'm now living what I should have lived all those years ago. So that's my message.
I didn't pass these out earlier because I think the questions that you raised were clear by the answers. And I know as we go deeper, you all may need the microphone, and we're under 10 minutes. Something I do want to say, this is not a session that clearly ends, because our identity as it changes never, that process, that evolution does not end. And I'm going to give this to Lorna in a minute, because I think you have some close kinds of things, but
I'm so interested in hearing from them.
yeah, one thing I want to say, I think for me, I think of identity. I think we often think of identity as something that starts here when we're born and grows and develops and changes, and to think of it in boxes. And I did not grow up in a cult. I grew up in a very abusive home. And that was a box for me. And I'm not here to say it's anything like your box. But I think we have chunks of identity, and then our environment may change. And we don't know what to do with that chunk. And so we handle it in all kinds of ways. Sometimes we lie and deny, even to ourselves or just to others, so that we fit in, so that we can keep going. Sometimes we just don't think about it and create a brand new one. I will tell you, I went to college and decided what kind of person I was going to be, down to the point of I was going to smile a lot. I was going to be engaging and present this nice person that I didn't feel like growing up. And so I think we can decide those kinds of things, and that can be a lie too, or it can be genuine. When I smile at you, I mean it. But it can be very difficult when we don't integrate. And I kind of think of integrating, like, wouldn't it be great if what I can say to you is, I'm Debbie Schriver, and my life has been created from all these events, and they're smooth, and they've brought me to who I am today. And that's really hard. And I want to say that I think we have many SGAs, MGAs who are still very much determining and identifying who they are as a survivor, as a thriver, and then as a human being. And it's very difficult to get to that place where if you say, I'm Shaina, if you say, I'm Matthew, in fact, there's a wholeness there, and it's not choppy with experiences and emotions. So those were just a few things. And I'm going to pass this to Lorna now, but on the way to Lorna, if you'd like to say something more, please do.
No.
Okay. You know, I've been thinking about this, and I think that it's so hard for people who are born and raised in cults because they are refugees, immigrants from another country, but they don't seem like refugees on the outside. They don't have a different accent. They don't have a different way of being. They often, usually, are coming out without family members, without their parents. And I kept, as you were talking, wondering about what happened to your parents along the way, and how that sense of being disconnected from everything in their past, and yet they're walking around, they're going to school, and you can't identify them as different. They're just feeling so different inside, right? And it makes it hard for them in some ways because people have expectations of how they're going to be. And they have to learn how to accommodate to their new, totally new world. The other thing is, I think that there are probably small moments in your past, as horrible as it was, and it sounds, but there were small moments that you might have a good memory about. Maybe something with a brother or a sister, some special time with your father, or whatever it was, just capturing these side moments. Like when you went off, Matthew, with your friend, and the consequences were horrible, but maybe that moment was fun in some way. But you're reclaiming your past. And the other thing, as Debbie was pointing out, I know our time is almost up, that we all have multiple selves, every single one of us. And as you were saying, the ideal is for porous identity, for ourselves to be better integrated. And you do that over time. You're starting to tell your stories. You're starting to open up and allow yourself to think about your past. And that's all for your health. That's a good thing, as painful as it is. So thank you both. And I know Debbie will too. Thank you both for sharing so much of your life and being so open. It really means so much, and we all can learn so much from it. Thank you for giving of yourselves.
Thank you.
I'm super proud of these two. They inspire and teach me something every minute, even when you're not in Knoxville, Tennessee, or Kentucky, where you are. You're connected to me. And Matthew, this is the first time we've really met and been together, and you will always be one of my kids. I call all of you my kids, and Shaina, there you are. I love you both. I care about you both. And most of all, you have had an impact on everyone in this room, who then will carry that impact and make a difference for someone else. I hope you have a great rest of the conference. And today, I hope we get more time just to have fun and go on that boat ride. Thank you all very much.